Welcome. It's time. It's time to drop in, open up, and receive. It's time to remember. It's time to believe. Let's elicit the beautiful, the good, and the true. It's time for me. It's time for you. Hello, and welcome to It's Time with Jillian Melissa. I'm your girl, Jillian Melissa, and I'm so glad you're here today. Some of you might be returning, and if so, welcome back. I feel blessed by your presence. And for those of you who are tuning in to this channel for the first time, welcome. I hope this space is invigorating for you. So today, I am most likely going to touch upon a heavier topic, and so I wanted to offer a trigger warning. Suicidal ideation and suicide attempts will be most likely discussed. And so if that is something that hits close to home for you, I invite you to take a moment and really pause, slow down, and ask your system if it's in your highest good to listen to this episode today in this now moment, and if you have the appropriate support to do so. Okay. So I want to talk about the higher self and soul as it relates to time. Time is a fascinating topic to me. Those who have studied with me or been in any of my courses, particularly those who were in Radiant Revolution, which is something I offered about 2 summers ago, know how awestruck I am by the concept of time. I'm grateful to my mother who introduced me to Brian Greene when I was in high school, took me to the 92nd Street Y to a lecture he was doing about string theory, and I read some of his books, and I was really blown away by the constancy of the speed of light and the permeability and malleability of time. I'm sure I will do plenty of episodes down the line about time, but today I really want to stay focused on the connection between the higher self and time. Why is this important? Well, our egos are very bound to the linear conception of time that we have, right? We have an arrow of directionality where we see the past, present, and future. Visually, people generally conceive of time as a line. I used to think of time as a horizontal line with the past to the left, the present in the middle, and the future to the right. And when I was forced to do timelines of things in elementary and middle school, like when did the dinosaurs come? And then when did the comet come and the volcano? And then what happened next? And I made several timelines, and that's what they looked like, right? It was a horizontal line. In some of my shamanic studies, I felt time moving, and this is going to be harder to explain without the visual, but I trust that we can do it. With past, present, and future as the past behind me, right? So I'm like pointing behind my back, the present right here, right now, where my body actually is situated, and the future in front of me. That 3-dimensional aspect felt true for a while, and then I was offered an inversion of that, a flip, which actually feels even more true, with the future behind me, the present still here in the frame of now where my body is, and the past actually physically in front of me. And the past is what I have to wade through, is what I have to continually confront. It's what's in front of me and often what's blocking me. And it is the future almost putting a loving hand on my back, as if you're lovingly pushing a child down a slide or on a swing. The future beckoning me forward by pushing me from behind. So just, interesting to conceive or really drop into how do we conceptualize time. However you conceive of time, your mind probably has some sort of image of how it moves. You think of the past as It cannot be changed. It's behind me. It's already happened. And the future as, ooh, what's going to happen? I get to co-create it. Some of you may have more of a fatalistic view that there's a predetermined destiny and you can't control it. Some of you might opt into varying degrees of free will. How much can you actually shape your future? I'm sure most of you believe you can shape your future. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening here, wanting to learn and grow and become better and develop, right? The ego is going to relate to time in some way because the mind has consciousness. Of course, you're going to think of time. And our lived experience, the subjective experience of being alive, creates this sense that the past is really behind us and cannot be moved. I can't redo my 5th birthday party and change who broke the piñata or, whatever happened. I don't think I had a piñata at any of my birthday parties, but I hope one of you did. Piñatas are fun. I hope some of you did. The point is, we conceive of the past as unmovable, and then how you conceive of the future is really up to you. The ego is often trapped in time, the 4th dimension. It gets really attached to narratives around time and often can't fully ascertain the true nature of time, which, by the way, I'm not going to claim I fully understand the true nature of time. I will continue to speak and lecture on time as I've grown to understand it from my studies of light and physics and really brilliant physicists and my own channeling, but I don't think I can claim to have a full understanding of the nature of time. The higher self, or the soul, is boundless and timeless, right? So the soul that you have, your unique individual soul or higher self, is a piece of source, of the divine, of all that is. It is connected to what some call the 5D, the higher planes, the energetic realms. You have an energetic body. You have spirit essence in you that is not just your physical body. When you die, when you pass away, that soul essence remains. What happens to it is also a conversation for another day. But the reason mediumship is a real phenomenon, why people can channel departed loved ones and be so precise and so accurate. I'll never forget when I did a mediumship sitting with Katie Mead King, and I was still opening up to the possibility of mediumship even being real, because that really was outside of my rational understanding. I could get telepathy, right? People who are alive sending thoughts to each other, that I could, okay, that makes sense. And clairvoyance, precognition, having visions of things in the future, okay, I can see that, that makes sense. But mediumship, that was hard for me. I'm like, they're dead. So, I don't get it. This person literally does not exist anymore. It was very challenging for me. But I worked with a beautiful mentor, healer, and guide, Katie Mead King, and based in England. And she was channeling my grandma Lee, who had really bright red hair and wore, this gaudy over-the-top jewelry and bedazzled jean jackets. And Katie is listing off all these details at first just to prove that it's my grandmother, because any medium can be like, oh, your grandmother sends her love and says she's proud of you. It's like, okay, that sounds like a nice Hallmark card, but how do I know that's actually the energy and spirit of my grandmother? A true medium generally should provide you with specifics that help you know, yes, in fact, that is that person. Details that only that person would know. Maybe an inside joke, maybe, whatever it is, something that proves to you that it's them before they deliver the divine message. But I was blown away that Katie could get all this information about my grandma and the things that she was saying and the language she was using. It was undeniable that it was the soul of my grandmother. And that's the thing. Souls are timeless. And what's remarkable about that and what I've found is that one's higher self, one's soul essence, can influence reality a lot more than the ego can, than the 3D human can. So often when individuals pass away, there is a divine decree that it's time for that soul to help those that it loves from the astral planes, from the higher realms. They can actually help out more when they are just in spirit and not bound by a physical body. Right? So my grandmother, when she was alive, was hilarious and fun and vivacious and all sorts of things. But she was also bound to, her home in West Orange or Boca, and, could only do what she could do. Send me cards or take me out to lunch or fill in the blank activity. As a soul, she has access to so much. She can sort of tap on my shoulder and give me that loving nudge. Go to that cafe right now. And then that's where you go and meet the love of your life, or orchestrate a lot of things behind the scenes. So souls have the ability to operate across time and space. But in terms of time, the higher self can give you information about what we're calling our future. This is where a lot of intuitives get really excited. When I first stepped into intuitive training, and I learned that I could channel what I need to do to grow my business, or how to lose weight, or fill in the blank, any of my ego desires, I would ask questions from an ego place, whatever it was that I desired, and then I would be able to channel answers from my higher self to get to that future outcome. And that works up to a point, up until your soul wants you to learn that intuition is meant to be used for more than just attaining our egoic needs. And self-centeredness can also open us up to different impulses, like a luciferic impulse or an harmonic impulse. Those are two Christian mysticism terms, for two different streams of consciousness. One is sort of this self-aggrandizing. The luciferic impulse is this self-aggrandizing, almost a high, all about liberation. It's very self-centered, service to self. The harmonic impulse is denser. It's more materialistic. Anyway, that's a tangent that we can go into another day if we want to talk about streams of consciousness, which I'm sure I'll do episodes about. But all to say, you can open yourself up to dark impulses and attachments when you're only using your channeling in a self-serving way. So the idea of being service-oriented and having a heart that wants to give and truly help others is not just this altruistic, lofty thing. It's actually protective for mediums. Because if we're not using our gifts for community, for service, for helping ground heaven into earth for all of humanity, we're actually going to put ourselves at risk to darkness. So yes, you can channel things to build the life you want up until a point. But what I want to share today is how my higher self saved my life. Just to give you a little bit of an opening and maybe help you start to question how you're conceiving of the arrow of time and how you're relating to your own life. I want to preface this narrative by stating that I've never shared it in this way before. So thank you for bearing with me as emotions may arise. I may stammer or stutter or stall. As I say that, my little pup Bubbles is coming to lay at my feet, which is absolutely precious. Thank you for your love and support, Bubbles. In the previous episode, I spoke to how my higher self saved me by rattling me awake from the deep, dark slumber that was fentanyl addiction. That is absolutely true. Today, I want to speak to another time when my higher self saved my life, but this time I had more intentionality and I really wanted to end my suffering, and I really felt like I could not. There's a period of my journey, roughly 3 years, that I call sort of the psychiatric era. And although I was on antidepressants for about a decade, as I shared, starting in college, I always felt up until this psychiatric era that I was still very much of right mind. So maybe I was depressed because I was sick, or my college boyfriend dumped me for the girl at BU because she's everything you are, but just a little bit less, and that's easier for me. Or maybe I was sad because of this story and that story and all the things I just complained about. I was really so deeply entrenched in victimhood. It's so fascinating too, because once you come anywhere close to a suicide attempt, which is where this narrative is taking us, people automatically assume that you hate yourself. And a lot of my therapeutic work involved that concept of self-loathing, and I, for so long, could not see it, could not comprehend it. I was very adamant that no, I love myself. I'm great. I'm amazing. I'm smart. I was really proud of my intelligence, as I've shared. I'm this, I'm that. I'm gripping for dear life to these qualities about me. I'm great. It's just that my reality sucks. It's that my world sucks. And I had a lot of trauma growing up and a complicated relationship with my mother, which I may or may not speak to on here. But I felt up until this psychiatric era that I'm speaking of, that I still was of right mind. Depressive episodes, anxious episodes, sure, but I was still very much level-headed, oriented to reality, and not struggling with mental illness per se, even though I was taking psychiatric medication. Now, what unfolded in the spring of 2017 really shattered that story I had about myself as a sane woman. I was living with my mother, very unhappy to be there. I was struggling with what I didn't know at the time was mania. I was pretty manic. I was prescribed Adderall, but quickly became addicted to that. Shocker. And so sometimes snorted the Adderall, often took multiple pills a day when I was only supposed to be taking one. So there was this drug-induced mania, this hyperness, this making piles in my room, sorting books and genius ideas, and it was all connected to reality. It's not like I was imagining anything that was not there. But I definitely started leaning a little bit paranoid. The time I was also seeing a therapist who was planting ideas in my mind about my mother's role in my illness experiences and all other sorts of ideas that, coupled with the Adderall, and I was also on an antidepressant. I think at the time it was Lexapro, but I'd have to check my notes from the psych wards, which we'll get to. We'll get to the black hole that is the psychiatric ward. A true travesty, because, oh man, when someone is in a mental health crisis and needs support, what we send them to, what a travesty. What an absolute travesty. More on that in a bit. So in the spring of 2017, living at my mother's house, still trying to claw together a life. You know, I was off the fentanyl, and so I thought everything was going to magically get better, but I broke up with my boyfriend of like 4 years in sort of a manic state and then immediately regretted it. He would not get back together with me, and I started to spiral, started to employ the dating apps, which are a breeding ground for toxicity, although bless your heart if you have found true divine romantic partnership and companionship through those apps. Love that for you. That was not my experience. And I was hooking up with this guy, Bumble Brett is how he was stored in my phone. And we smoked a lot of weed, some weird pen to the carb, hooked up to the bong, to the gravity bong, to the volcano, like some crazy contraption. I don't even know. And I got super high, and I basically wanted to run away from my mother's house. I loaded up the car very frantically when I left my mother's house and was headed to Bumble Brett's, and she knew something was wrong. I was very frantic and manic, and I was just like wanting to run away. Interestingly, I called my father while I was driving. I didn't even know where I was headed at first. Like, I was just in this crazed state, and I wasn't crazy, but I was just in this such activated, charged, hyped up state. And my father said I couldn't go there if I didn't feel right. I was like, there's something wrong. And at the time, I didn't have the language, which is bizarre, but I didn't understand how hooked I was on the Adderall, and how coupled with an antidepressant, if you're already someone who might lean towards hypomania, it's very easy to just go into mania. I think the Adderall alone would have done it. Like 100 milligrams of Adderall, I, as a young woman, had no business being a part of. And then the therapeutic work I was doing really was feeding this narrative that I needed to escape my mother's house. And so I just kind of like packed up the car, and I was like, I'm out of here, and went to this guy's place and called my dad. I don't know if it was on the way to Brett's or after Brett's. He told me if I don't feel okay, because I was expressing this distress, like this panic, my heart pounding, it's hard to breathe, panic attack type of vibe. And I had never really had panic attacks before, except once at Disney World when I was a little girl and couldn't find my family and everyone was taller than me. But otherwise, it's not like I was prone to panic attacks, and this was not usual for me. I didn't really put anything together because I was manic and I was high. My father told me, go to the hospital if you don't feel all right. I begged him to go to his house. He said, no, go to the hospital. I don't remember exactly. I was at Brett's. He did something I didn't like or weird or whatever, and I left his place, and I just started driving. And then I wound up pulling over at a school near his house, like early in the morning. And I was like, I can't drive. I don't feel right. Something's really wrong. And I was struggling. I think it was a couple that pulled over and saw me, asked if I needed help. I was like, I'm really struggling. I think I need to go to the hospital. Like, I'm having trouble breathing. And again, I don't remember if I called 911 or they called 911, but I expressed a desire to get medical attention. Rookie motherfucking mistake on my part. An ambulance shows up. It was very weird. I was put in a stretcher in the back of the ambulance and taken to Morristown Medical, local hospital. And I was put in the emergency room in a psych hold. I didn't know they had psychiatric holds, really. I think I maybe heard something about Britney Spears being held, or like 5150, or like, I didn't really know what these things meant. But I didn't know that within the emergency room of my very, upper middle class suburban hospital, they have essentially jail cells. So it's a room with cinder block and a metal toilet jutting out of the wall and just a cot jutting out of the wall. and that's it. No window of any kind, no access to light, no clock, no ability to understand what time of day it is. And I was in there for, I believe, 3.5 days. I was not told when I could get out, how I could get out. I was not able to contact my parents. I was stripped of my clothes. My glasses were even taken away from me. And suffered a lot of abuse those 3 days in that room, which I may or may not speak to. And you will hear me say this a lot as I continue to talk about psychiatric care. One of the fundamental problems is that it's a sector of our reality that attracts a lot of abusers, because imagine this. Someone's in a psych ward and they claim, the guard fingered me inappropriately. Obviously, that's inappropriate. Why is the guard fingering me? No one's going to believe this person if they're in there with a diagnosis of schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder. They're attention seeking. They're, whatever, fill in the blank, blame their pathology. So it's a great place for really sadistic, really fucked up people to go work. Now, I'm not saying everyone who works in psychiatric emergency care or hospital care or intensive outpatient programs or partial hospitalization programs is an abuser. Of course not. I'm just saying that I saw a lot and experienced a lot, and it makes sense. It makes sense. So unfortunately, despite being manic and panicked, after, I don't know, maybe 6 hours, I was very much sobered and of right mind. And why am I trapped in this cell? Can I please speak to my parents? Does anybody know where I am? My parents did not know where I was. This was a very traumatic experience for them as well. And only recently have I been able to have conversations with my father about this time. And, he still doesn't want to hear all about it because it's too painful. And on the one hand, I honor that. And on the one hand, on the other hand, all these hands, I could be an octopus. They don't have hands. You get the imagery. He shared with me that he will always hold fear that something like this will happen to me again. And I was trying to articulate, this will never, ever, ever, ever happen again. And here's why. And also, it's important to me that you hear me out and believe me, because if you're holding this fear, I don't want it to infiltrate my reality. And then he's like, well, you have a force field around you. Nobody's emotions can infiltrate that force field. And we went back and forth for a while, ping-ponging in conversation. But we ultimately landed on, it was very traumatic for him. He doesn't want to hear a lot of details. And I encouraged him to seek out support with an aligned practitioner to move through the trauma of seeing your daughter in a state that, didn't make sense, or any of the things that he needs support on. So anyway, just a loving reminder to the loved ones of those who have struggled with all sorts of dis-ease and fractures in well-being. You may very well need support as well. So always encouraging support. Seek support, seek support, seek support. So back to my narrative. I was released from this emergency room psych cell. It really was a jail cell, under the condition that I go to an intensive outpatient program called Gen Psych. Again, I had never heard of intensive outpatient programs at this time in my life. I had no idea what Gen Psych was. I signed the document with a crayon because they wouldn't even let me have a pen or a pencil because I could be dangerous. And I'm literally expressing I was never a danger to anybody. I was not even a danger really to myself. Up to this point, I did not struggle with suicidal ideation. That's what I want to be really, really clear about. Even in my depressive moments, I never wanted to really die. I just wanted the pain to go away. The suicidal ideation came on board for me after the experiences of trauma within psychiatric wards. That in and of itself is horrific. And I know I'm not alone in this. And this is why I'm going slowly and sharing as much as I'm guided to as I channel this transmission for you in this story, because I imagine there are so many people like me who are sitting on this, and maybe they struggled with an eating disorder, or they were experiencing some symptoms of bipolar and they wound up in a psych ward for whatever the reason is. And we all find our way there. Not we all, but all of us who find our way there for very specific reasons, and often come out worse and more damaged and more traumatized than when we went in. That is fundamentally broken. That system needs serious revision. But at this point, I hadn't even made it into the actual psych ward. This all transpired those 3 days within the emergency room in this psychiatric hold. I kept trying to ask, why can't I wear clothes? Why am I being held prisoner? Trying to be as calm as possible. Yet, obviously frightened, and I'd never been trapped in that way, held against my will, not able to make a phone call. I'm like, don't even prisoners, I don't know, I see the TV shows, they get a call to their attorney. My dad's a bankruptcy attorney, doesn't count. Like, fuck, give me a phone call. Let somebody know I'm alive where I am. Maybe they can visit. Maybe they can help get me out. And there's one particular guard that was incredibly taunting. And I could tell he just got a sick pleasure watching me cry and beg to can you just keep the door open so I can see out, so I don't feel trapped in this cell? Like, why am I trapped? And that kind of solitary confinement for someone who's already, like, I was on one to such a degree that I called 911 thinking maybe I'm having like a stroke, or I didn't know it was really a panic attack, an Adderall-induced, heightened, agitated state. The last thing I need is dark, solitary confinement and abuse. But alas, that is what I received. And they say, sign this document and you can get out. And for the love of God, sign it in green crayon. Get me the fuck out of here. And at the time, I refused to go back to my mother's home. So my father got me in a room at an extended stay hotel in New Jersey. And again, I was not making any income. I was not working. So all of these decisions were very much up to my parents in many ways, or so I thought. So I allowed. I stayed at that extended stay for about 10 days while I was attending that Gen Psych program that I, again, signed in crayon, agreed to go to. And I was so rattled and confused what was going on. Why had I been held against my will and mistreated in that cell? I was still stuck on that. And then I'm driving to this weird psych facility on like the side of Route 10 in New Jersey and Livingston, and like passing by the bagel place I used to go to, but then like making this weird turn to go to some psych facility. And they also wouldn't let me outside. There was this weird thing. Well, now I'm under fluorescent lights. Like over the weekend, I was in this pitch black dark room. Now I'm under these bright fluorescent lights, and these people won't let me out either. I'm like, can I just get some fresh air? Never let me get, they just love not letting me get fresh air. I wound up one afternoon outside of a Walgreens getting whatever I was getting. And I think I called my mom first, actually, but I don't truly know. I called both my parents and told them something felt really wrong. It didn't feel right again. And they were, tinkering with different psych meds at the time. My team at this Gen Psych or whatever, I felt very off. Something was very wrong. And again, made the mistake to allow an ambulance to come. And as soon as I got in the ambulance and they shut those doors, I was like, fuck, this is going to happen all over again, isn't it? So I was trying to talk very kindly to the EMTs. Hi there. But I'm already starting to get panicked as they're like not shackling, but like putting down your ankles in the fucking stretcher. Hi there, 10 days ago, like I was at Morristown Medical. I really don't want to go there. Can you please send me to any other hospital? So first I'm just trying to get to not that hospital because I'm afraid I'm going to wind up in that room. And then I'm trying to not get any sort of, like if we go to, no, we have to go to Morristown. And I'm like, fuck. And I'm panicking. And I already don't feel okay. And I'm already, and then, can it please not be psychiatric care? Like, can I get genuine medical attention? But somehow landed back in that same room and then was admitted without a choice into their psychiatric ward. Again, how does this happen? But I'm admitted, and that experience fucked me up in a way that I thought would be for the rest of my life. And now this is where we're getting to, of course, the aforementioned psychiatric era. Once I entered that psych ward, and I think I was in there for 10 days, something like that. I never knew One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was real. I couldn't believe that this was real, that I'm trapped in this hallway, in this hospital, with just like a bunch of crazy people, and I'm one of them. And there are people who get to come in and out. They're nurses and doctors, and they get to wear shoes, and they get fresh air, and I'm stuck in here, and nobody's telling me what I have to do to get out. It is the ultimate escape room. I have no idea why or how people enjoy escape rooms. I know that's become very popular, and years later I was living in Los Angeles at a sober living facility called Rewrite Recovery. And the owners, Katie and Jen, found me to be a true delight. And, I never wanted to do what everyone wanted to do. What a surprise. And I didn't want to do what they wanted me to do. Also, what a surprise. They wanted me to do an escape room. I had no choice. I was forced to do 2 escape rooms. And why? It's so traumatic. Like, why would I opt into the experience of being trapped and having to figure out what I need to do to get out? That is my least favorite sensation in the whole world. That is the psych ward. I wound up in a psych ward several months later, which I will also speak to, but I also want to be cognizant of time. Try to get to where we're going, which is my higher self intervening in a very poor pseudo suicide attempt. But I'm really trying to break this down and give this space and time it deserves, both for myself and also for those who have had experiences comparable to this and desire to be met and seen. And for those who have no idea that this is possible. Because I think it's important you hear this too. Months later, in a different hospital, Overlook Hospital Psych Ward, I befriended a lovely girl named Catherine who is thriving, doing well, does stand-up comedy now, is in a beautiful, loving relationship. I'm so grateful. She also made it out. They were trying to commit her, and it was awful. And she went to NYU. I went to Harvard, so we were very similar, like the Jewish sort of neurotic girls who are young and what are we doing here? We don't fit in type of thing. We were literally having meetings about what do you think we have to do to get out? I overheard over breakfast when I was getting my tray that they say if you don't express being suicidal for 3 days, I'm like, well, obviously, like, just don't express being suicidal ever. Like, duh, like that's, and like we're conferring back and forth, trying to strategize. I'm thinking, should I smile at the psychiatrist? Should I be neutral? Should I say, yes, sir? Yes, doctor? I'm like, and that Overlook hospitalization, because it was my second psych ward experience, I was a little bit more sociopathic about it, frankly. I was just like, let me just play this game to get the fuck out of here. And I wound up getting out in 5 days. So it did work for me. Or maybe it was 6 days, something like that. Which is also sad. Like these places, we should have centers where those who are in psychiatric distress, mental health distress, desire to go and receive treatment that actually supports them rather than makes them feel more fearful, scared for their life, and they're dying to get out. At Overlook, they also were really encouraging ECT, electric convulsive therapy. So I'd be having lunch with somebody, and then on his schedule in the afternoon, it would say ECT. I wasn't sure whether or not he had any choice. And that's exactly what you think. They shock your brain. They put the thing in your mouth, the rubber or whatever, and they shock you. And these people came out looking fully lobotomized, no life in their eyes. It was horrifying. And I was just trying to, please don't give me ECT. Please don't give me ECT. Oh my God, that will ruin my life. But anyway, escape rooms suck. And the psych wards were ultimate escape rooms. I also found not only do these places seem to attract abusers, but you also just get punished for non-compliance or for advocating for yourself. And I, at this, first psych stay that I'm referring to at Morristown Medical, the bed I was sleeping on was a hospital bed. Most of the beds were just cots on like a wooden frame. This was a hospital bed, and it was some sort of inflatable mattress that was within that plastic frame. I don't know if it's actually plastic or what the material is, but the hospital bed that can adjust and the buttons on the side and whatever. At night, the mattress component, which really felt like a raft, like an inflatable little 3-inch raft, would deflate completely. So I would just be on the hard frame, which is not a comfortable way to sleep. And I have the trauma from having to sleep on a hard cot. Like the psych cell, it was not a comfy, cushy bed. I think it was literally a metal slab that was the cot experience. Like just trying to sleep on cement. I'm fairly confident about that. So it was just horrible. So I would walk to the nurse's desk and say, "Hi, excuse me," in my most sort of meek, tender voice. "My bed has deflated. I'm wondering if there's any way somebody could please either inflate it up so I can sleep, or I'm happy to be moved to a regular bed." And like trying my best to just sound like weak, and I also was weak, and I was being drugged with all different drugs. They're like, "Here, take Risperdal. It's an antipsychotic." I'm like, "But what? Can you explain to me in any logical, oriented to reality kind of way how I was experiencing psychosis? Why are we giving me an antipsychotic right now? I'm surely open. By all means, please express." So I never got answers. And then when I did advocate, "It's okay, buddy." When I did advocate, like, please inflate my bed, they would just force me to take another medication. So then I learned, just shut the fuck up, Jillian, and just try to comply. But at the same time, that was against my nature. And they're giving us these weird, word puzzles to solve and handouts. And I'm inquiring, how is this going to help my mental health crisis that I'm allegedly here for? How is doing this word riddle game that's meant for a 7-year-old going to in any way help my mental health? As I shared, I was lucky enough to be released from this psych ward. I returned to my mother's home, and I started attending another psychiatric day program. This one was in Princeton, New Jersey, which kind of got me excited because senior year of high school, I was debating between Princeton and Harvard, and a lot of my peers really hated me at that time. I made quite the production out of that choice, but I wound up not going to Princeton, and now I was going to Princeton, get it? And, I just was having fun with it. I liked the drive. I listened to my CDs. That'll date me, but whatever, I did. Rent the musical and the mix CD Neha made me, Neha Sampat, for senior year of high school. Thank you, girl. That CD really saved my life also. But I drove to Princeton and I attended a psychiatric day program, did my best to really take it in. But it starts to take a toll when you're surrounded all day by people who, rather than volunteering or attending a job or planting a garden or taking care of a pet or finding their way through their own autonomy, they're attending a program where other people are controlling their time, controlling their medication, and offering quote unquote therapy. So I was surrounded by a lot of really interesting characters, and I started to develop this belief that maybe I just belonged in a psych ward forever. I never in a million years thought that any of this was possible for my own life. And then I just spent the last month having all of these wild experiences, from being locked in the cell like a prisoner under the guise of a psychiatric hold. No one's telling me why I'm being held. It's okay, Bubbles. I got out. We're safe now. And then the day program, Gen Psych, and then another psych hold, and then another, or rather my first psychiatric hospitalization, and really getting acquainted with the fact that psych wards are real and all the crazy things that go on in there, and not because the people are crazy, but because the framework and the institution is fundamentally crazy and broken and backwards. I know, Bubbles. I started believing that I belonged in a psych ward. I started looping this thought. I belong in a psych ward. I belong as a ward of the state. It's okay. I know it's not real now, Bubbles. Just let me tell them about it. It'll be fast. And no matter what therapist I saw or what psychiatric medication I took, I could not get rid of this obsessive looping thought that I had never experienced prior to any of this psychiatric treatment. And now, after having been in a psych ward and at a day program and at another day program and subject to an emergency room psych hold in a cell, I now believed I belonged in society as a crazy person, and rather not in society, removed. I know, Bubba. I guess we have to pivot. Hey, it's not true, my baby. I'm not true. It's just what I believed in the past. This obsessive loop made sense to no one, myself included, but I was adamant, and I was telling my mom and my brother and my dad and my psychiatrist and my therapist and anyone who I could talk to, and they were all reflecting back to me, of course you don't. Of course you don't belong as ward of a state. Of course you don't need to be committed. You're fine. But I felt it so fervently. And then what was braided into that loop, what was folded in, was the desire to die. Because if I really believed that I belonged as a ward of the state and needed to have my life and medication and every aspect of my reality controlled by some system because I was so crazy, then why would I want to live? That's no life. So I might as well die. And this is such agony. And I don't want to be here anymore. And so my suicidal ideation really started after this iatrogenic, this psychiatric trauma. I will call it all trauma. I kept trying all the remedies, and then my psychiatrist, Dr. Goldman, not through the day programs, but like a private psychiatrist now, graduated out of the programs and was doing no better, prescribed Xanax for my anxiety. And what was really interesting was, I remember one day, it was the first time I was going to see him alone, and I was so anxious to talk to him that I took half a Xanax just to get through the appointment with him. How bizarre. How fundamentally broken is that? So had this bottle of Xanax, and I was laying in my bed at my mother's house where I was living at the time. And again, I'm in my late 20s in my mother's house, a home that was filled with a lot of trauma for me. And I didn't want to be there. I hated how I had basically lost all of my 20s, right? I worked for a couple of months after graduating college, and then I basically felt like I was an invalid. I spent most of my 20s doing treatments for physical problems. My right femur shattered, my femoral neck, emergency hip surgery. Oh, then I got on fentanyl for 3 years. I just felt like I lost I lost my whole life. It felt like, what's there to live for? So I was laying in my bed, and I had the bottle of Xanax in the bedside table, and I didn't want to get out of bed. That bed was super fucking comfy, by the way. Shout out to my mom for getting me the best bed in the world. But it proved challenging in my sickest years because I just wanted to lay in the bed all the time. She would have to bribe me to come downstairs and even just sit on the couch, especially when it was so hard for my body to move and I was able to walk, but in so much pain. And I don't know what it was about that day, or I just felt done. I can't endure another day of this. I was in so much anxiety. I was shaking all the time. I was panicked. It's like, I would literally be making those noises. It would be embarrassing for my family members to be around me. And I'm not just projecting that. That is something that a few of them shared. I felt ashamed of what I had become. Like a very, very disturbed, sick person. And so I thought, what's the point? And I looked at the bottle of Xanax, and there were somewhere around 11 to 13 pills in there. And I just swallowed it. All of them. I didn't actually want to die in that moment. And I knew that amount wouldn't kill me, but it's like I wanted to sleep for a couple of days. I just needed a break. I needed the pain to stop. I just couldn't tolerate it a second more. It was such agony. I felt, it was one thing to lose my mastery of my body. That was really hard. And since the age of 18, I really struggled with my body in so many different ways, and it was excruciating for me. It was a lot to endure, but I felt like I still had my mind. And even if I was depressed for a season or anxious for a season, I felt like, okay, yeah, I'm just taking Lexapro, I'm just taking Wellbutrin, that's pretty normal, but like, I'm still a regular person. I still functioned. I was still in a sorority. Kappa Kappa Gamma, what up? Blue and blue. The beautiful, the good, and the true. Where are we at? Where are my Kappas at? And I felt like I could still coherently describe my experiences. Even in the first psych ward stay, I was such a beautiful advocate for myself. I felt proud and confident, even though I was confused and upset. But since that looping, bizarre, obsessive thought that I now belong in a mental institution, that something happened in the psych ward that fundamentally shattered me, that took about a month to really come into place. And I think the day program at Princeton House also elicited that. At the time, I had no concept of higher self. I had no concept of soul other than this sort of flowery language of like, yeah, my soul loves dancing, and just a generic sort of way of using soul, but no spiritual science, esoteric understanding of what is soul, what is higher self, and no understanding of dark energy. At the time, I didn't believe in things like demons or ghosts or ghouls or reptilians or rods or fragments or entities or portals, any of these things, that spells. We're going to have to do a whole little episode about spells. Dark magic, witchcraft, was not something I really believed in. And it's 100% true. Again, like gravity, you can believe it or not, you're still susceptible to it. If you're awake to it, you can actually do something about it. So I swallowed that bottle, wanting to just silence the pain. And immediately after swallowing it, I heard inside of me a voice. I'm going to say clairaudiently. So the clairs are the psychic senses. Clairvoyance refers to seeing with your third eye. You know, when you close your eyes or you have a vision of something, that's clairvoyance. Clairaudience is hearing. Intuitive hearing. Higher plane hearing. And I heard a voice, and she was calm, firm, regal, loving. And she just said, "Get up, Jillian, get up. Go crawl to your mom's room and tell her what you've done. Get up, Jillian, get up, Jillian, get up, Jillian." And I listened to the voice, and I already felt myself fading in and out of consciousness. I felt like, you know, if you've ever taken a sleeping pill and you feel like you're going under and you can fight it a little bit, somehow I was able to crawl to my mom's room and tell her I swallowed the bottle, I need help. And she was able to drive me to Overlook, the nearest hospital. And in the car, I was in and out of consciousness. But ultimately, I was fine physically. Luckily, I didn't have any organ damage, or they didn't have to pump my stomach. There was nothing drastic that needed to occur. I'm not really sure what they did, frankly. I'm sure I got an IV of some sort. I just remember being in the emergency room, and I remember the psychiatrist coming in and my parents telling me that I was going to have to be admitted into the psych ward. And I lost it. Please, God, no. Please don't make me go back to a psych ward. And the psychiatrist was very stern, and he looked at me and he's like, "I see in your file you went to Harvard, yeah?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was trying to do her say, "Please, please, sir, whatever you want me to do, I promise I'll go to another day program. Please just don't force me to stay in this hospital with like no understanding of when I can be let out. Please, sir, do not make me go up there. Please, sir, please, sir." "You went to Harvard, right? What did you think was going to happen when you swallowed that many Xanax?" And, you know, he was to a degree right. I knew what I was doing. It was an attempt. It wasn't a true suicide attempt and I want to die. It was a cry for help. It was an attempt to kill off what actually was dark interference. Dark energies that wanted me to die. That was not of my soul. The soul never talks to one that way. The soul is not self-harming. The higher self and soul is love. It is light. It is beauty. It is peace. It is grace. It is the field from which quantum possibilities arise. It is miracles. It is not hatred and loathing and fear. That is interference. Sometimes it's ego, but more often than not, it's not even ego. It's interference. It is dark, distorting impulses and energies that are not connected to spirit, not connected to source, and need a host, like a parasite. They need somebody to feed off of in order to exist. And I was a shiny light and didn't know it. And I had all sorts of crazy things attached to me. Anyway, wound up, becoming another psych patient admitted into that hospital stay, further traumatized. Horrific things happened there. That's not for today. As my man asked me, is every episode just going to be you talking about your trauma? Hopefully not. Let us pray. But also, I know that my traumas serve as a compass, and they are here to teach and illuminate. And there's a reason why. Ooh, do you see that light shining right now on my third eye? Oh, I could cry. That's beautiful. There's a beautiful light coming in from the window. My traumas and the fact that I endured them and survived are divine. And by sharing about them, I hope to help you avoid some traumas of your own. Anyway, years later, when I really awakened to my psychic gifts, to an understanding of my higher self, to a belief, to a faith, a return to God. For so many years, I did not believe in God. How could I? How could a God do this to somebody? And at the beginning of my psychic awakening, I used the term source. I did not use the term God. Then I shifted to spirit, the divine, and I play with different languaging all the time. But the aspects of me that are connected to the divine started nudging my ego to re-examine some of my past experiences when I was ready. And I wound up going home to New Jersey on a trip, and I went to that very house, to my mother's house. On this trip to New Jersey, I was reflecting how blessed I felt to be happy and healthy, of service, not having suicidal thoughts, not believing, of course, that I belong in a psych ward or a state-run mental institution or a group home, and ultimately just so blessed. And I went up to my bedroom and I saw that bed, and I was guided to lay in it in the exact same spot where I had once swallowed that bottle of Xanax. And I laid there and I started chanting, really, "Get up, Jillian. Get up, Jillian. Go crawl into your mother's room and tell her what you've done. Get up, Jillian." And I just felt full body chills. I imagined that I was talking directly to that version of myself from, 5 or 6 years prior. "Get up, Jillian. Get up, Jillian. You can do it. Get up, Jillian." And I did that for about 30 or 40 minutes. I just sent that previous version of myself so much love and encouragement. And I tried to transmit to her the codes of life is worth living, and there is so much beauty and bounty on the other side of this struggle. You don't understand it yet, but it's ripe for the taking. And I just was repeating on loop, "Get up, Jillian, get up, Jillian, get up, Jillian." And I realized it was my own voice that I had heard. It was my own voice that I had heard that had sounded so regal and confident and beautiful and loving and nurturing. That is not how I had conceived of my own inner voice at the time, and certainly not my own, biological voice, what my voice sounded like. And it sounded very different. And interestingly, my voice has changed over the years, and I credit that to a lot of the work I did with one of my mentors around my voice. But it was my own voice. Now, when I felt that, when I heard that all those years ago when I swallowed the bottle of pills, one could argue that perhaps I was having sort of a precognitive experience where I knew it was my future self talking to me, or I just perceived it. You could say it's my higher self. You could say it was the voice of an angel, that it wasn't actually me, but that I just chose to honor whatever that impulse was, and that me laying there that day talking to my former self and just laying there saying on loop, "Get up, Jillian," was for nothing. And maybe the voice that I perceived all those years ago was something else. I choose to believe that it was the voice of my higher self. And yes, me in my ego self, my human self, laying there was a bit of a formality, but it also felt like a beautiful ritual, felt like a beautiful honoring. I know for a fact, I know with every fiber of my being that my future self called me forward and nudged me to crawl to my mom's room, which maybe saved my life, certainly saved my body a lot of damage. And that is the power of being tapped into our higher self. It's also the power of just having a soul and a higher self, right? I wasn't tapped into it when I swallowed that bottle. I wasn't aware of my soul essence. I wasn't consciously thinking about my future. I wasn't consciously thinking about the aspect of my spirit that is timeless and boundless and always wanting the best for me and always orienting me to my highest timeline. I didn't have any conscious conception of that. However, that aspect was still working for me and through me. And I was still able to hear that voice and to heed its call. I want to take a moment and honor those of you who may have lost someone to the experience of suicide. And I know that I am very blessed and lucky to have made it to the other side and not struggle with suicidal ideation anymore. I encourage you, if you are in a place where you're experiencing self-harming, self-loathing thoughts or not wanting to press on anymore, please seek out whatever help feels aligned for you. If that's conventional therapy, please. If it's medication, please. If it's group therapy, I know for me that the traditional modalities did not serve, and so I had to seek out more alternative energetic support. But I just want to encourage you that there is hope. And to those of you that have lost those to individuals, if you've lost somebody, I am sorry for your loss. It's an excruciating way to lose somebody. And my hope is that if society had a better understanding of esoterica and dark energy interference and these impulses, we would lose a lot less individuals to suicide, because it's never the soul of the person that actually wants to kill themselves. And if we're incorporated with our soul, if our higher self is integrated and we're embodying our soul, that is not something we will do. And further along on this podcast experience, we will dive more into the topic of dark interference and distortion and all of that. And those who have more spiritual sight, that's going to make a lot of sense to. And those who are operating more only believing what they see on the 3D material realm, that might be a cognitive stretch and leap, and that's beautiful too. But if you even take all of the energetic stuff out of it, the reptilians and ghosts and ghouls and portals and spells, we're going to do a whole episode about spells and dark magic and occult stuff. If you take all of that out of it, it is so evident just on the 3D, tactical, practical, pragmatic level, our mental health infrastructure is so lacking. And psychiatric care really needs a reboot. I encourage you to read Anatomy of an Epidemic if you haven't, if you're curious about the rise of psychiatric medication. That's a whole other topic. There's so many topics. But I truly believe if we had appropriate mental health care, we would lose a lot less individuals to suicide. And more importantly, even than that, if we had a society where people weren't traumatizing other people, right? Often someone finds himself in therapy feeling suicidal or so depressed because they've been incredibly traumatized, wounded. And individuals who are connected to their higher selves, who know who they are, who are connected to their inner child, who have done the shadow work, they're not traumatizing other people, right? So if anything, to me, the uptick in, alleged mental health disorders is really an opportunity to re-examine how are we living as human beings, How are we communing with the earth and with each other and with our own spirits? I share this narrative for a lot of reasons, but namely to open you up to the possibility that those nudges that you feel, those voices even that you hear, those inspired inclinations might be your higher self speaking to you, might be your soul self. It might be your future self directly speaking to you. When I was laying in that bed, talking to my past self, saying on loop, "Get up, Jillian, get up, Jillian, get up, Jillian." I don't think I've ever felt more powerful or more integrated in my whole life. I felt like I was the living expression of my soul. And my soul was fully embodied. And my body was just a manifestation and just an expression of my soul. I have never felt so much like a beam of light. and I was just blasting light to that former version of me. And I believe she heard it. And so while we conceive of the past as unchangeable, I wonder if I hadn't done that. What if I didn't lay in that bed that day and say, get up, get up, get up, get up, get up? Maybe it was a voice of an angel that saved me, and I would have heard that voice regardless. But maybe that was in fact required. Maybe it wasn't a formality. Maybe my future self needed to save my past self. Just something to consider. Perhaps the past is not as fixed as we conceive, and perhaps our participation with our own lives and our own spirits can shape more than we think. I truly believe, and I invite you into the framework, that we are quantum players. We can heal our past. We can even change our past. Right? So if you're joining me on this premise that I'm operating under, that it was my higher self, or maybe it was angels, but as we talk about the angelic hierarchies, angels operate through us. The term earth angel is a phrase for a reason. Angels operate through human beings. They are very real. But we are quantum players. We can heal our past. If I hadn't intentionally gone back to that same place and ceremoniously chanted, get up, maybe everything would have happened exactly the same. But there is the maybe that maybe I wouldn't have heard that get up voice, and I would not have gotten up. I invite you to not be asleep like I was when I swallowed that bottle of Xanax, but choose to awaken. What if you have a soul? You do. If you don't believe that you have a soul, if that feels too woo-woo, I invite you to play with that, to question that, to poke at that. If you're already on board with the concept that you have a soul, but you're not yet communicating in any conscious way with that aspect of you, I invite you to do so. I invite you to call upon your higher self. Ask that aspect of you to make itself known to you. Declare that intention. Make your desire to commune with your higher self, with your capital S self, your soul self, explicit. Some that I know operate more with the language of the unconscious mind rather than higher self or soul, but I don't think those are the same. And so if you're only using, subconscious reprogramming and you're staying at the level of mind, even if it's the unconscious or subconscious mind, I invite you to dive a little bit deeper. So I shared this narrative to invite you to call upon your higher self, to reconsider your relationship with time, to imagine how you may, even right now, be able to go back and offer healing to previous versions of yourself, including your inner child. I also share this narrative on that more practical level. Psych wards, rehabs, sober livings, institutionalized paradigms have a particular pull, like a black hole. I used that language before, and I find a lot of people get sucked back in. And I don't believe it's because these individuals are somehow fundamentally broken. I use that phrase a bunch, very intentionally, throughout this podcast today. The framework is broken. And so for those of you who feel compelled to advocacy or want to discuss that broken framework within our matrix system further, please reach out. We really don't have a setup to help those with psychiatric distress, and we don't have any sort of spiritual science, energetic perspective. I mean, I am floored looking back that none of my psychiatrists asked me if I meditated, if I grounded, if I did breath work. And that's all still very much on the 3D level. Yes, it might be alternative, but there is no spiritual science, energetic perspective in traditional psychiatry whatsoever. There is no conversation around soul. There is certainly no conversation about dark interference. And also for me in the traditional therapy paradigm, until I found internal family systems, IFS, there was no real true shadow work or even inner child work. So I spent decades just circling the drain in therapy that did nothing, that moved the needle nowhere. And so I also encourage you to really check in with the support you have. I know a lot of people come to see me or others that they've been in therapy and feel like they've plateaued and they need something that's a little bit more deep, more piercing, more tangible, that actually causes change and isn't just complaining to an empathetic ear. And so if you feel like your therapeutic support is not helping you, please, please, please find the appropriate support. Don't be afraid to pivot. And I also shared my story today to touch upon acceptance. For me, the spiritual journey has ultimately been about learning and embodying acceptance. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean tolerance, and I don't mean resignation, but I mean more accepting, as in accepting a gift, receiving. Can we accept the present moment precisely as it is, even if it is excruciating? Can we trust that it is always capital L love that is reaching towards us? We get so attached, our egos get so attached to our expectations and our desires. It takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage and a lot of faith to accept what life is giving us, especially when it does not match our expectations. But the more we accept what is, the more we can dance with what is, the more, seemingly ironically, we can actually change those challenging circumstances because they pass. They move out and through. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, before we wrap up for today, that if you are someone who has struggled or is struggling in the ways that I articulated today, there's a good chance that you're a light worker or a light bringer or a light beam or a space holder, that you have a big mission here on earth. Maybe it's not being forward-facing, sharing your voice on a public platform like I'm doing now. Maybe it's just that you and your spouse anchor in a marriage of true unconditional love, and that affects your family and your friends and your neighbors and eventually your children and their friends, and you just become this beacon of light in your community. Anchoring in light can show up in a variety of ways, but the current model of reality, what a lot of people call the matrix, right, is not necessarily designed for empaths, highly sensitive people, and light workers, those who are highly attuned to capital L love and capital T truth. And there's a lot of it is a slave model, right? A lot of it is give your power away to somebody else and let me put within you some sort of implant, a fear implant, so that you'll continue to comply. So I just want to offer that message of hope to anyone who may be feeling like you've had a target on your back. Maybe you have. And that's not about instilling fear, but it's about discernment. And maybe there are dark forces that have wanted to tear you down, and maybe they've just been within your own mind. Again, if you don't play in these energetic realms that I'm referring, or you don't believe in dark energies or demons or things like that, you can scratch all that and just stay at the level of psychology. Maybe there are parts within your own shadow, your own inner masochist, your own inner sadist, your own inner sociopath, that parts of you hate you, parts of you want to destroy you. I wanted to just offer this message of hope. Radical healing is always available. Radical healing is always available, and trust your heart to guide you to the healing that is appropriate to you. And it's okay to evolve out of certain systems or structures and crave something new. That's actually quite healthy. Thank you so much to everyone who made it this far and listened. I know it was a lot. I know it was intense. It was certainly intense for me. I invite you to ask your body what you may need to either shake off some of this dense, heavy energy around self-harm or just the way in which the world maybe doesn't meet the current needs of some of its most beautiful inhabitants. Ask your body what you need to integrate, and please continue if you haven't already, dialoguing with your higher self and seeing how your higher self wants to relate to the timeline of your life. And maybe you don't see a line, maybe you see a spiral or a staircase. I really invite you to employ your imagination and creativity. But please remember, your past is not fixed, nor is your future. I am all about moving out of fate and into destiny. I'm currently reading Free Will by Sam Harris, and he has a very interesting perspective that there is no free will whatsoever. Even my love of cookie dough, right? I didn't decide that my taste buds like cookie dough and that that's enjoyable to me, like at the most minute level. But I choose to believe, while there are certain aspects of reality that we've absolutely contracted for and are bound to happen no matter what, we also have free will. And I invite you to make the free will choice to choose love. I love you. Thank you so much for tuning in to It's Time with Jillian Melissa. If you're feeling like it's time to leave that toxic relationship, launch that business, share your voice with the world, if you're feeling like it's time for whatever, it probably is. So I invite you to trust your intuitive compass. And if you're feeling like it's time to connect with me, I invite you to follow me on Instagram at JillianMelissa_intuition. That's really the hub of all my content, and using the link in bio, my link tree, you can access links to book a private session with me. You can join my monthly membership community through Patreon. I post upcoming workshops, group channeling classes, intuitive guidance gatherings, and much more. So that's really the best way to stay connected with my energy. My hope is that you bestow love on all those who cross your path. And until we meet again, I love you.